This is 20 minutes of impact from the United States Energy Association Power Sector Podcast, sponsored by Uplight. I'm Herman K. Trabish. I've covered the power sector since 2006, and I currently report for Utility Dive. In this episode of the podcast series on the demand stack, my guest is Sachu Constantine, Executive Director of Clean Energy Policy Advocates, Vote Solar. Sachu is going to give us his perspective on the new demand stack concept proposed by energy management and demand flexibility provider Uplight, an approach to customer-owned distributed energy resources that could maximize their benefits to utilities, to customers, and to the power system. In Sachu's three-decade career, he's been a research assistant with Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, program manager for the Alliance to Save Energy, senior regulatory analyst with the California Public Utilities Commission, a market analyst for SunPower, and director of policy with the Center for Sustainable Energy. He's been Vote Solar's executive director since 2021. All of which goes to show that everybody really wants this guy, and we got him. So, Sachu, to begin with, tell us a little bit about Vote Solar and your work there, and how you see the value of the elements of a demand stack, which are DER and VPPs.
Gladly. And Herman, thanks for having me on again. As long as my career has been, Vote Solar has actually been around nearly as long. We are entering now into our 25th year as a clean energy and solar and climate advocate. We continue to be focused at the state level where most of the decisions about energy deployment are made, as you and your audience well knows. And we really try to bring a solutions-oriented, people-first approach to the work that we do. So we're thinking about how this system, this incredible energy grid, interacts with people's needs. And, in the shadow of the California energy crisis, Vote Solar emerges to try to bring clean, reliable, soon to be very cost-effective solar in 2001 to people's energy stack. Since we're using that term, we're going to talk about that a little later, right? And we started with that idea of choice, and now we're really talking about integrating the most competitive, the most cost-effective, the most ubiquitous form of energy, most dynamic supply of energy out there in the market. So we're in a really exciting place after 25 years. I am really excited to be here at the helm. And we know that the current energy system was not built for the challenges that we face today, let alone coming tomorrow. We have an affordability crisis that is developing. We have an associated climate crisis. There's a huge spike in energy demand. We're talking about these data centers, but it's also electrification of vehicles and buildings and businesses, really. And we know with this 25 years of experience that local solar and storage in the form of community power networks, in the form of virtual power plants, as part of the entire portfolio of distributed energy resources, these can be ramped up quickly and flexibly to meet this moment at a low cost with a modern outlook, modern technology. And we're really excited about this idea. And I'm so happy that we're talking about this idea of a demand stack. It's a similar concept to something we've been talking about. Let's use the term virtual power plant, for example, where we're connecting all of the demand, the homes, the businesses, the community solar into one powerful, flexible network, which helps keep the lights on during extreme weather, during peaking events. And it's also saving people money, and it's building resilience.
Exactly.
And it can really turn that local energy, that all these distributed energy resources, both on demand side and supply, into a shared and really reliable resource.
So let's get into this now. So Uplight, the demand stack concept that Uplight has come up with is in some way would mirror the utility supply stack. And the supply stack, utilities use that in their planning and in their operations. They're very familiar with this stack idea, the supply stack. And what Uplight wants to do is take something called a demand stack, which would include behavioral, rates-based, device-driven demand-side management programs that they already have. All these disparate ways of incorporating DER and VPPs. They have these energy efficiency programs, they have demand response programs, they have time varying rates programs, and all of those call on, support, or allow DER and VPPs to participate and do all the things you just described. So the question really about this demand stack idea is, could it motivate utilities to see those programs as a more comprehensive set of resources? And do you think that would change how they see DER and VPPs?
Yeah. Well, I love the fact that you're using the word motivate, right? I mean, a lot of what we know is that there are solutions in front of us. I think the uplight framing is really exciting. I think it's similar, as I said, to versions of arguments that we've been making for years, but they've really taken an interesting frame, and they've tried to put it in terms I think that a utility and regulators can understand. And it's really just to say that these demand side programs in aggregate can be really valuable.
I think Uplight they work with utilities, and to drive forward virtual power plants and the use of DERs, so they understand utility language in a way that some participants in the power system don't really understand. Of course, in my background at utility dive, I understand some of the utility
Right.
language as well. And they're putting it, that's what I like about this idea is they're putting it in utility terms, the supply stack, now the demand stack. And so what do you think is going to have be an impact there for the demand stack?
Yeah, well, so again, thinking of it already as a portfolio of resources, not these individual silos, right? They things like a smart thermostat and a heat pump and a solar or battery storage can complement each other. They are not separate entities that all have to be managed separately. We have power controls, we have lots of technology that can automatically coordinate these resources, responding to signals from the utility using this framing, as you said, using the utility framing of stacks and the grid resources. They have some great graphics in their white paper on this at Uplight. Um, you start to see something that actually should have been more obvious, I think, much earlier. The grid, as you know, and Herman, you know this, the grid has to be in balance all the time. But yet the pictures that we have in our head of it are of this grid stack, the supply side stack, these big central power stations passing through the wires out to demand. And we often treated that demand as just a given, right? So you're trying to balance something, but you're really only working with one side of that equation all of this time, all of these hundreds of years. But we've been developing demand response programs, energy efficiency programs very successfully for several decades now. Now, for the last 2 decades, we've been growing solar and storage, increasing our computing capability, the analytics that we have, the meters, the measures that we have to coordinate that demand side and actually balance both sides of that equation is incredible. It's a huge boon for things like solar because now solar can really manifest all of its benefits. It's a very sound concept when you're talking about balancing an electrical grid. What we really need, and I think you're highlighting this, is for the utilities and the regulators to treat these resources, to treat this new technology, these new capabilities, with the value that they actually bring. They have the same seriousness, the same impact as new central station power plants, old central station power plants for that matter. And in fact, with inverter-based technologies, we're bringing even more services to the grid edge than we've traditionally been able to bring in a bulk power system.
Um, Inverter-based technologies for our listeners that aren't familiar with that, uh, things like wind and solar need a device called an inverter to switch between AC and DC electricity so that it can go on the power system and off the power system. And it creates some very manageable, very easily controllable additions to the management of the resources. But it's a term that allows distinguishing between things like coal plants, which aren't inverter based, and wind and solar that are. Am I saying that right, Sach?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right, Herman. And yeah, forgive me for using such jargon. I mean, really, what I'm talking about is using modern, clean, almost magical sources like wind and solar, as opposed to just burning things, digging things up out of the ground and burning them, and mass producing steam to turn wheels to generate electrons the way we've done it for 150 years. We have better ways of generating services, whether it's the energy that we need or other things like making sure the frequency and the quality of the power can be improved through these modern resources like solar paired with storage.
Two things about what you just said, Sach, that really catch my attention. Number one, um, if a utility is only thinking about its supply stack, then if there's a sudden spike in demand, as you described, demand is changing so much these days. If sudden spike, the first thing a utility might think of is, oh, let's ramp up our natural gas plant. But if they also have from planning onward an awareness of the demand stack, they might not want to turn on that natural gas plant, which is a more expensive and more problematic type of resource. They might say, let's get something from we know that there's something in our demand stack that can meet that need,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, the demand stack is like giving the utility just more dials and knobs to use to balance this system, making it automated, making it easy, making it very inexpensive. One of the things at the heart of the Uplight proposal, the Uplight concept, is something that we also think is really important, and it's what you just said. This has to be incorporated at the planning stage. When we're looking at the integrated resource plans, this is the plans that utilities put in front of regulators to say this is how we're going to meet the needs of the energy needs of the economy going forward. We're going to buy these resources, we're going to build these plants, we're going to build these lines. In that planning is when we should be considering all of the distributed resources out there. They should be planning to have more smart thermostats, planning to have more battery storage, and have that battery storage attached to solar for generation all across the system. And they should know what those resources are. And the only way we're going to do that is if we start from the get-go. And I think that, that is one of the great ideas. Treat it with seriousness. Start from an early stage to count these resources and then use them. Use them judiciously, use them as much as you can. We know how much solar energy is hitting the earth at any given moment. And we should absolutely be taking best advantage of that with this kind of technology and this kind of thinking.
Absolutely. And by the way, those resources are all out there. I mean, planning is creating an awareness of what's already out there. But I want to move on to another question.
The grid is changing fast, with data centers, electrification, and extreme weather driving a surge in energy demand. Utilities can meet the moment with existing resources by activating energy customers and their connected devices with Uplight's integrated demand stack. Uplight coordinates energy efficiency, rates, demand response, and virtual power plant programs into one cohesive strategy to improve grid resiliency and energy affordability. Their AI-powered platform connects customers to best fit programs, then forecasts, dispatches, and measures flexible capacity to deliver megawatts when the grid needs it most. Learn how Uplight is helping leading utilities harness over 8 gigawatts of flexible load at uplight.com/USEA.
The next question I want to ask you, Sach, is about this term that everybody is talking about these days, system utilization. It's becoming a key to understanding how power systems can protect affordability without compromising reliability. So that's the high level perception. Tell us what you understand as system utilization, and tell us whether you think the idea of a demand side resources stack could improve system utilization and help power systems utilities get those affordability and reliability results. So first, what is it, and then will demand stack help it?
Yeah, utilization, I mean, in a literal sense, it's how well we use all of the infrastructure and equipment that we buy as ratepayers through the utility. They use our money to buy these resources, and those resources get used. But some get used more than others. In fact, one of the hidden cost drivers that we're contending with right now is that we have to buy a lot of equipment to meet only a few hours of demand in the year. We might buy a whole peaker plant that only runs for 30 hours. We might buy system capacity of various kinds, very expensive system capacity that we only need for those hottest summer days or the most critical periods of demand. We're not utilizing those resources very efficiently. We have to have them, because that's the way we've designed our system. But now with this idea of a demand stack, we can talk about buying the right equipment that we will use more effectively, that we will use more frequently. That means that we're spreading the cost out of all of that equipment, all of that investment. That helps put downward pressure on rates. If we solve the 100 most expensive hours of the year by using all of the rest of our equipment more effectively, well, that helps bring the cost of the whole system down. And if the equipment that we're using for that we're now using more regularly, utilizing more effectively, if that equipment is more durable and it's not sitting mothballed for 300 days of the year or 330 days of the year, we have more assurance of system reliability. We have more system resilience built in. So I think the utilization frame and that idea, that lens is a really good one. That this is a way to bring costs of the system down. It's a way to incorporate more cost-effective infrastructure, and a way to ensure that the system has the flexibility built in to meet the demands of a really dynamic modern economy.
Let's break down a couple of those things. First of all, another aspect of system utilization that the demand stack supports is there are things in the demand stack that can turn down the need for electricity when that need is starting to go up really fast, right? So
Yeah.
a lot of the time that a lot of the day, a lot of the 24-hour day in a utility's life is the system is running at, I don't know, 50% utilization. I've heard people say 60%. So I've heard people say 40%. So, but it's around half of the potential to drive electricity is not going unused. Half of the generation that we have is going unused. But there are
We're still
times.
paying for it.
What, say that again?
We're still paying for it.
Right, exactly. And then of course at peak demand periods, like when people come home from work and turn on their lights and their TV and their dishwashers and so on, or early in the morning when people wake up and turn on their electric heaters in the winter and that sort of thing, then demand spikes upward. So the idea of a demand stack that contains, let's say, batteries or EV charging that can be controlled allows people to not use electricity at those high demand periods, but to spread them away from the peak and use them at other times. So we're bringing that 50% up to 65%, but we're also bringing that potentially 110% down to 90%. So the
Exactly
system
right.
is being used more widely, right? That's one of the things. Am I saying that right?
Yeah, Herman, I think that's exactly right. We have a couple of concrete examples. 2 summers ago, actually just last summer, California was exceeding its system capacity. It was getting into what's called the marginal reserve. That's like the system is really straining, everything is redlining, the dials are all twitching, everybody's very nervous that the system is going to experience collapse. And a whole bunch of the kinds of resources that would be in a demand stack, what Uplight is calling a demand stack, what we would refer to as a virtual power plant, batteries and solar showed up in that minute, in that interval, brought the demand on the system infrastructure down below the margin of reserve, allowed the system to continue functioning. For most people, they experience it as a normal day, right? But what could have happened is that there could have been brownouts, rolling blackouts, brownouts, other kinds of disruptions, and then they would have remembered that day because of this use of this kind of demand stack or distributed resources. We were able to continue operation. When you think about, let's use my home, for example. I have in my home smart plugs on my refrigerator and on most of the big appliances. I have a solar panel array on my roof. I have a battery in my garage. I have a heat pump water heater, which the heat pump water heater is listening to signals from the grid. The smart plug's the same thing. I have an aggregator, Ohm Connect, who's been really great to work with. When the grid is getting stressed and the utility operator wants to turn on a gas plant, instead they first ask Ohm Connect or some other organization like that, can you turn anything down right now? Instead of me turning this plant on, going to cost a lot of money, start up, what about if you turn down 1,000 refrigerators and 10,000 water heaters and stopped charging, at least for a 15-minute or 20-minute interval, a bunch of electric vehicles? Well, suddenly a new power plant's worth of power has showed up free on the grid. That's
That
an
happened. That
amazing
happened.
flexibility, right? And we can
Yeah,
do
that
that
happened.
node by node.
Yeah, and that happened in the instance that you're describing
Correct.
last summer. 500 megawatts, almost 500 megawatts showed up. And it wasn't turning anybody's refrigerator off, right? It wasn't
No.
turning anybody's air conditioning off. It was just dialing it down 1 degree. Person wouldn't even know that it was happening, right?
Yeah, that's
But
correct. And in my case, Herman, just for example, the controls on that heat pump, it knows ahead of time. And the same thing for the refrigerator. It knows ahead of time, so it'll actually run, the refrigerator turns on and off all day anyway. So it just decides, I'm going to turn on now instead of 15 minutes when I know there's going to be a problem. Turn on now. I'll sit tight for half an hour, and then I'll turn on again after this event is over. And the same thing for my hot water heater or my space heater or for my electric vehicle. I notice no difference at all in performance. My house stayed perfectly comfortable. I got hot water when I needed it. My car was ready when I needed it. All of those things are taken care of through judicious use of these signals.
okay, I wanted to ask you one more question, but I think we've talked a lot about it. But let's get to it because there's another term that people are going to hear that is becoming important in the operations of power systems these days because we have this load growth and we have this load growth uncertainty. We don't know exactly what we're going to need and when we're going to need it. And maybe that's something we could talk a little bit more about. So we're using this term flexibility, and that's what you've been describing all through this conversation, the flexible resources in the demand stack. So do you think that demand stack concept could help maximize load flexibility and how would that I think you've talked a little bit about it already, but go ahead and say it again. What benefits could that provide the power system, especially
Yeah.
because of this uncertainty that we have, right? In load growth.
Yeah, no, I think that uncertainty is really good to talk about. And just really quickly, I think you're right. There are two aspects to the flexibility, right? The system, as we said, it has to always stay in balance. And we have a very dynamic load curve. Things used to be pretty straightforward. People got up, there was load in the morning, as you said, and then there was load again in the afternoon that had to be dealt with. Now we've got multiple cycles of peaks and demands. We've got cars moving around and charging. So we have to have a lot more flexibility in the operation. But also, you're pointing to something that's really important. We have to have some flexibility in our planning. We don't know how many data centers are going to come. In fact, it's probably likely that from the potential peak, it's going to be some fraction of that. So how do you build ahead of time for this very important investment and huge demand without maybe overbuilding or building too much? So we need flexibility in planning as well. So operations and planning flexibility both can be helped through this demand stack concept and idea. For us, for Vote Solar, we talk about virtual power plants and community power networks, which include a whole portfolio of DERs. They are no regrets solutions. That's part of the beauty of using them as one element of your entire stack. You can invest, for example, in a gigawatt of solar plus battery plus another gigawatt or so of demand response kinds of activities. And it won't matter if the data center load comes or not. It's going to be used and useful no matter what happens with the economy going forward because you have this higher utilization of all of these assets. They're all being used all the time to their maximum efficiency. And those investments that you made were not dependent on the demand from a particular data center. We know some are going to happen somewhere. Building these flexible resources in helps us meet that demand without overbuilding, without spending really precious ratepayer dollars at a time when people are struggling to pay their bills, right? We want to supply the needs of the economy, but not stress out the kitchen table or the small business owner or any of the folks who end up often footing the bill for these things. So flexibility is key in both aspects.
A couple of points that I just want to throw in. I've recently been looking at headlines that say that the hyperscalers are going to invest $1 trillion in building data centers and data center infrastructure. I've also been looking at headlines that say there's an uprising against data centers and people are going to stop data centers from being built. So that's what I mean by uncertainty. The other thing that we haven't fully talked about, Sach, is you know, these resources that could offer an alternative to that uncertainty without any it's a no regrets type of thinking, because those resources are already there. Customers own them. You've stressed that point a couple times. One of the interesting things that I want to stress to close out here, because we're almost out of time, is that for a lot of years in California, which was one of the foremost builders of distributed energy resources, people were worried about shifting costs from rich people that have solar on their homes to poor people that can't afford solar, lower income people, excuse me for my unwoke terminology, but this is exactly the opposite of that, right? Because the people that can afford distributed energy resources buy them, and then the utilities can use them to save everybody costs. Am I saying that right, Sach?
100%. And look, one of the problems with that cost shift argument was that it let the utilities off the hook. Sure, if they don't use any of these assets out there effectively and properly, if they don't plan for them and deploy them in the most cost-effective way, they can drive up costs. In fact, they've been making investments that have been driving up costs for everybody all this time. Here's a chance for them to co-invest along with those solar homeowners, along with battery storage investors, and help drive costs down for everybody. I can benefit if my neighbor goes solar. And in fact, if things get cheaper and solar is getting cheaper, batteries getting cheaper, I can also put some of that on my home. But either way, we all benefit from this. It is absolutely critical that we make sure that solar and storage and participation in this economy is accessible to both low-income families and under-invested communities. And by putting this value stack in here, this demand stack concept, we can make that possible. We can make it accessible and affordable and financeable for the people who need it the most. And that, I think, is the way that we build a stable system going forward.
Yeah, and that's what you just said is what I like so much about the demand stack, Uplight's demand stack concept, because it's not about fighting the utility. You're not doing it. It's like just showing the utility, here's what you already have in your system. Just think about it as a stack. But that's all the time we have, Sach. I'm going to close this out. I want to thank you. My guest has been Vote Solar Executive Director Sachu Constantine, and he's described his perspective on the new concept of the utility demand stack, an innovative way to maximize the benefits of utility demand-side management programs. I also want to thank our sponsor, Uplight, my producer, Melissa Brown, and as always, I want to thank our listeners for taking the time to check out the USEA Power Sector Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe, like, follow, and share with everybody you know our quest for energy transition solutions.